This is the second part of the discussion of this 2020 A-level Economics MCQ paper. We will start with question 26. It says, suppose that in a hypothetical economy, real GDP equals 80 trillion and then the nominal GDP equals 240 trillion and the general price level equals 3. And then they say if the money supply in the economy is 30 trillion, the velocity of circulation of money is, okay, so our task is to find this velocity of money circulation. And when you look at all these terms, if not when you look at all these figures given to us in this question, you can understand that this question is from the equation of exchange. So the way that we develop this equation of exchange is money supply into velocity of circulation of money is equal to price level into real output. And what happens if you multiply this price level by the real output, you get the GDP under the nominal price, right? So here T stands for the real GDP and P stands for the price level. When you multiply the two, you get the nominal GDP, and M stands for the money supply and V stands for the velocity of money circulation. Right. So using this equation, we can easily get the answer for this question. So money supply is given to us as 30, that into V, that's the unknown that we need to find. Price level in the economy is given to us as 3, and the real output is 80, right? Real output is 80. So that we can simply apply this equation. V equals 3 multiplied by 80 over 30. And what's the answer? Answer is simply 8, right? So velocity of money circulation is 8. And then the answer for this question 26 is the first one. Right, look at this question 27 now. It says, assume that one of the commercial banks in the banking system has excess reserves of 400 million. Okay, so right now they have excess reserves of rupees 400, let's say simply 400. And the statutory reserve ratio is 20%. SRR is also given to us. And how much is that? That's just 20%. Meanwhile, a customer of this bank deposits 25 in his current account and the bank lends 120 to another customer. How much additional lending can be granted by this bank now? So after all these things happen, we just need to calculate the total amount that can be granted as a loan by this bank. Okay, but if you look at the situation before anything happens, right? If you just look at the initial situation, initially the question says that this bank has excess reserves of 400 million. By now you all should have understood this. What is it? The excess reserve that the banks have must be the total amount of loans that they can grant to the general public. So this excess reserve, let me put a slash here and write initial, let me write lending capacity. Initial lending capacity. So how much is that? That's 400, right? Initial lending capacity is 400. And what happens now? A customer comes to this bank and deposit 25 million. So we all need to understand this point here. If SRR is 20%, the bank, I mean, it's compulsory for this bank to maintain a statutory reserve of 20% from this 25 million deposit. But the remaining 80% of this deposit, they can again put that into their excess reserves and they can use it to offer loans to the general public. So I can write, so this is the initial excess reserve, if not initial lending capacity, and new additions. So let me write new additions to excess reserves, right? New additions to excess reserves. So how do we find this thing? New additions. There's a deposit of 25 But from this 25, we only take 80% to the excess reserve because the 20% goes to the statutory reserve. So when you calculate 25 into 80%, if you find that, that will be obviously that's 20. So that the total lending capacity of this bank, right? Total lending capacity of the bank is 420 now. But later on, what happens? The bank lends 120 for a customer, which means again their lending capacity decreases. So from this, let's deduct the granted loan. So let me write here minus granted loan. So the granted loan is 120, so that the remaining, I can write here, remaining lending capacity, right? Remaining lending capacity is how much then? That's 300. So that is in millions. So answer for this question 27 has to be the fifth one. Right. Now look at this question 28. In 28th question, it says, what are the main objectives of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka in implementing monetary policy at present? See that now the main objective, there are only two main objectives. The first one is maintaining price stability, and the second one is maintaining the stability in the financial system. So these are facts. As I always say, you just need to go through the note to find this, right? To find the answers to such questions. And there's no particular logic here. ඒකේ ඒ විදිහටම තියෙනවා. ඔයාට තියෙන්නේ ඒකේ ඒ විදිහටම හොයාගන්න. තියෙන දේ හොයාගන්න එක තමයි මෙතන කරන්න තියෙන්නේ. ඒ නිසා මේ වගේ question එකක වෙන options බලලා කිසිම තේරුමක් නැහැ. මොකද these are specific things, right? ඒ නිසා ඔයාට තියෙන්නේ අර note එකේ තියෙන කතන්දරේ මෙතනින් හොයාගන්න. ඒවා note එකට අවිලා තියෙන්නේත් අර central bank එකේ website එකට ගිහිල්ලා ඔයා බැලුවොත් එහෙම these objectives are mentioned there. හරි. එහෙනම් answer is the first part. Right. Look at this question 29 now. It says, suppose the statutory reserve requirement is 10% and the central bank conducts open market purchase of 300 million from the commercial banks. Okay, then මොකද වෙන්නේ? On this side, we have the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and on this side, we get the commercial banks. So Central Bank of Sri Lanka engages in this open market operation where they purchase treasury bills from the commercial banks. I think that you heard what I told you. Central Bank purchases treasury bills from the commercial banks, and in return, what do they supply to the commercial banks? They supply cash to the commercial banks. And how much they supply? They supply 300 million in cash, right? So 300 million get transferred to the commercial banks. ඊට පස්සේ මොකද අහන්නේ? What is the maximum possible change in money supply resulting from this purchase? The maximum possible change, right, in money supply. See what happens when the central bank passes this 300 million to the commercial banks. These commercial banks engage in credit creation process using this 300 million. එතකොට මොකද වෙන්නේ? So this will have a multiplier effect. එහෙනම් how do we find this thing? ඔන්න කටියෙන් බලා ගන්න. So let me once again use this M1 money supply definition. So this is simply the currency held by the general public, right? Currency held by the general public plus demand deposits maintained by the commercial banks. එතකොට in this case, what happens? Nothing happens to the currency held by the general public. The reason this 300 comes from the central bank, not from the general public. And so there's no change in the circulation of money among the general public. So this plus the demand deposits maintained by the commercial banks. So to find the total impact on demand deposits, let's do a small calculation. So let me write total deposit. right? Total deposit is equal to, let's write initial deposit, right? Initial deposit into deposit multiply. So initial deposit is just 300 and the deposit multiply is equal to 1 over SRR. So it's 300 plus 1 over SRR is given to us here as 10%, which is 0.1. So simply 300 multiplied by 10, answer is 3000. So the total of demand deposits get increased by 3000, and as a result, even the money supply increases by 3000. And that's the final impact on money supply as a result of this transfer of 300 million from central bank to the commercial banks. And answer is this. මම මේ වෙලාවේ ඔයාලට දෙයක් මතක් කරනවා. මේ මතක් කරන දේ තමයි ඔයාලා කාටම හරි අපේ කලින් පේපර් එක 2019 පේපර් එකේ 30th question එක තේරුනේ නැත්නම් ඔයා මොකද කරන්න ඕනේ? මෙන්න මේ question එක තව එකපාරක් තනියම කරලා මගේ මේ discussion එක අහලා ඔයා ගිහිල්ලා 2019 30th MCQ එක කරන්න. මේ තියෙන්නේ ඒකම තමයි. ඒ පැති දෙකක් ඒගොල්ලෝ ටෙස්ට් කරන්නේ. මේකේ අපිට කියනවා right, you need to find the total increase in money supply කියලා, but in that 2019 30th question they have given us that this is the total increase in money supply, and then they asked us to calculate the statutory reserve ratio. එතකොට ඒ ගාන සහ මේ ගාන දෙකම එකයි. ගානේ අහන විදිහ විතරයි වෙනස තියෙන්නේ. ඔයාට ඒක තේරුවේ නැත්නම් මේ ගාන කරලා ආයෙමත් ඒක රිෆර් කරලා බලන්න. Right. Now look at this question 30. Right. In question 30 it says monetary policy affects aggregate demand through changes in. මේව ඇත්තටම these are not even questions. මොකද හේතුව ඔයා අර past papers ටික අපේ discussions ටික අහලා තියෙනවා නම් ඒ discussions වල කියපු ඔක්කොම ටික ඒ කියන්නේ ඒක තමයි මේ ටෙස්ට් කරන්නේ. දැන් අපි කීපාරක් ඇත්තටම කියලා තියෙනවද? See, when the central bank controls their monetary policy, they do it mainly by controlling the money supply and the interest rate. So what happens when this interest rate is changed by the central bank? When the interest rate is changed by the central bank, they may increase the interest rate or they may decrease the interest rate. So when these interest rates are changed, right, the consumption and investment also changes. Now, for example, if interest rate is increased, consumption decreases, investment decreases. මොකද හේතුව people can't afford loans when the interest rate is very high. So that if they can't obtain loans at a lower rate, they will cut their consumption and they will not engage in new investment activities. And as a result, what will happen to the aggregate demand? Aggregate demand consists of the component C plus I plus G plus NX. So when the interest rate increases, C decreases, I decreases. As a result, even AD decreases. But on the other hand, right, if interest rate is reduced, what will happen? People can obtain loans at lower rates, so that they will be encouraged to get loans and do consumption activities. They will be encouraged to get loans at lower rates and make new investments. So when C and I increases, what will happen to the aggregate demand? Even that increases. ඉතින් ඕක තමයි මේ question එක අහන්නේ. බලන්න. Monetary policy affects aggregate demand through the changes in these two. See, when monetary policy changes the interest rate, that directly influences on C and I, and then it influences on aggregate demand. ඉන්සා අහන්නේ මොකද්ද? Through the changes in, answer is very simple. Consumption and investment spending. නැත්නම් C and I simply. Right. Look at this question 31 now. In question 31, it says, when an externality exists in a free market. Of course, if it's a free market economic system, externalities exist and the market does not consider these externalities. The reason the market forces, I mean demand and supply, will be decided totally based on private benefit and private cost, and the externalities will not be considered. It is if I draw the equilibrium, so this is how we get the graphs. So let's say that this is the supply curve and this is the demand curve, and this demand curve is based on marginal private benefit and the supply curve is based on marginal private cost. So based on the marginal private cost and private benefit, equilibrium price is decided here and the equilibrium quantity is decided here. Clear? But the problem, though we just call this as the equilibrium quantity and this as the equilibrium price. And this may not be the socially optimum equilibrium price, I mean, socially optimum price or the socially optimum quantity. It may not be. මොකද හේතුව, the socially optimum price and the quantity is derived based on the supply curve that is drawn based on marginal social cost and based on the demand curve that is drawn under marginal social benefit. ඉතින් ඒ නිසා දැන් marginal private cost curve එක මෙතන තිබුණාට සමහර විටක, right, if there are negative externalities in production, the supply curve based on marginal social cost may be somewhere here. Demand curve එක මෙතන තිබුණාට the demand curve based on the marginal social benefit may be somewhere here. And එහෙම බැලුවට පස්සේ, see that now what happens? Socially optimum price is greater than the equilibrium price. See, socially optimum price is greater than the equilibrium price, and also socially optimum quantity is very much lower than the equilibrium quantity. ඉතින් ඒ වගේ අර equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity may differ from the socially optimum price and quantity in a market economy, and that happens very often, right? That happens very often. ඕක තමයි කතන්දරේ. So if you remember this thing, you can find the answer very easily. So where do we find the answer? Okay, we'll read this question 31 again. When an externality exists in a free market, first one says equilibrium price is determined at an artificially high level. දැන් අර මගේ කලින් එක්සාම්පල් එකේ උනේ මොකද්ද? equilibrium socially optimum price එක ටිකක් higher වුණා, socially optimum quantity එක lower වුණා. ඒ හේතුව මම ඒ වෙලාවේ assume කළා that the supply curve is on the socially optimum supply curve is on the left side and the socially optimum demand curve is also on the left side. මම එහෙම assume කරපු නිසා එහෙම උනේ. ඒ නිසා එතකොට මොකද වෙලා තියෙන්නේ? artificially high price ද artificially low price ද කියන එක මම ඒ අඳින graph එක වෙනස් වෙන දෙයක්. ඉතින් ඒක නිසා අපිට මේක ආන්සර් වෙන්නත් බෑ, මේක ආන්සර් වෙන්නත් බෑ. මට ඔය ගැන කියන්න තියෙන්නේ මෙන්න මෙච්චරයි. When an externality exists in a free market, the equilibrium price is determined not at an artificially high or artificially low. But what I can say is equilibrium price is determined based on marginal private benefit and marginal private cost. නැතුව artificial මොකක්වත් එකක් base වෙලා නෙමෙයි. Right, and then the third one, market cannot reach equilibrium. I think Mamahana, what is this thing? This is the equilibrium itself. So even if the market does not consider the externalities, the market can reach its equilibrium. But that is the equilibrium again based on marginal private cost and marginal private benefit, right? So it can reach equilibrium. So none of these are the answers. Fourth one, market equilibrium does not ensure socially optimum resource allocation. 100% true, and that's what I was explaining, right, earlier. And the fifth one says the consumers of a product incur extra cost in terms of maintenance and insurance. ඉතින් ඔයාට මේවා කියනකොට කිසිම අදාළත්වයක් නැහැ කියලා හිතලා හිනාවක් කියන්නේ නැත්නම් වැඩක් නැහැ. ඉතින් ඒ නිසා මේ වගේ ඒවා කොහොමත් මානසික වෙන්න බෑ. අර නිකන් common sense වගේ බැලුවත් අපිට ඒවා කපලා දාන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් එහෙමයි කියලා දැන් ඔයා මේක ගහලා දෙනවා නම් එහෙම ප්‍රශ්නකුත් නැහැ. ඉතින් ඔයා පොඩ්ඩක් මේක බලන්න ඉතින් මොකද්ද මම මේ කිව්වේ කියලා. ඒතකොට ඔයාලට තේරෙයි ඒක තමයි කියලා. Right, look at this question 32 now. It says market fails to produce public goods because, okay, so the market, if not the market economies fail to produce public goods due to one of the characteristics in these public goods. And what's that specific characteristic? There are two main characteristics. So on one side, we say that there's non-rivalry related to public goods, and also we have non-excludability related to public goods. And the market economy fails to produce these public goods due to the second characteristic, due to non-excludability, which means, let's say that the government provides a particular public good, right? Let's assume so the government or whoever the supplier, right, provides the public good. But the problem is, once it is provided, the government, if not that other supplier, will not be able to remove the consumers who are not going to pay the price. Then example එක විතර street light එකක් දැම්මට පස්සේ මේක යටින් යන මිනිස්සු දිහා බලලා ඒගොල්ලන්ගෙන් සල්ලි ඉල්ල ගන්න බෑනේ. ඒක දැම්මොත් දැම්මම තමයි. ඒක යටින් එක්කෙනෙක් ගියාද දෙන්නෙක් ගියාද තුන් දෙනෙක් ගියාද ඒකේ ප්‍රශ්නයක් නෑ. දැම්මොත් දැම්මමයි. cost එක incur වුණා. හැබැයි price එක ගෙවපු අයටත් මේක යටින් යන්න පුළුවන්. price එක ගෙව්වේ නැති අයටත් මේක යටින් යන්න පුළුවන්. සහ එතකොට එක්කෙනෙක් හිතනවා දැන් price එක නොගෙවපු අය මේක යටින් යනකොට එයා හිතනවා මම ගෙවන්න ඕනේ නෑනේ වෙන කෙනෙක් ගෙවයි කියලා. එයා හිතනවා මම ගෙවන්න ඕනේ නෑනේ වෙන කෙනෙක් ගෙවයි කියලා. ඒ වගේ ඉතින් කවුරුවත් ගෙවන්නේ නැතුව ඔක්කොම මේක යටින් යනවා. එහෙනම් then what will happen? අන්න that we recognize as a free rider problem in economics related to this public good. So due to this free rider problem, the producer or the supplier will not be able to charge a price. So if they can't charge a price, the market economy will not supply such goods. ඔක තමයි සරල කතන්දරේ. එහෙනම් මොකක්ද ආන්සර් එක වෙන්නේ? There's no demand for such goods. No, there is a demand, and that's why somebody has to provide this thing. Second one, it is impossible for the producer to charge a price from the consumers of such products. 100% true. So due to this non-excludability, or maybe due to this free rider problem, the producer will not be able to charge a price from the consumers. Third one says such products usually entail large external costs in production, which is not true, and generate external benefits in, yeah, there are external benefits, but there's no significant external cost when it comes to production of these public goods. And the fourth one says their production leads to increase income inequality. No, in general, the production of public goods decrease the income inequality. හැබැයි මේකේ දැන් ඇත්තටම ඔයා මෙහෙම හිතන්නකෝ, their production leads to decrease income inequality කියලා තිබුණා කියලා. Then again, this is not the answer. ඇයි ඒ? Then the statement is true, but still that is not the answer. Why? Because the question asks us to recognize the reason why does the market economy fail to produce the public goods, fail to supply the public goods. So that's the main part. That's a real question. ඒතර ඒකට ආන්සර් එක මේක නෙමෙයි, මේක මොන පැත්තට තිබුණා? ඒතර ඒකට ආන්සර් එක only this one. Right. Fifth one says private firms generally have a higher production cost than the public sector. No, in general the opposite is true, right? In general, opposite is true. Right. 33. Main components of recurrent expenditure of the government of Sri Lanka are. ඉතින් මේවත් අර කතන්දර තමයි. කියන්නේ these are very well recognized things. ඔයා නිකන් අමුතු logic එකකින් මේක හොයන්න දෙයක්වත් නැහැ. If you refer the note, you can easily find the answer for this. Meaning, what's the answer for this question 33? It is simply the third one. So it says interest payments, salaries and wages, current transfers to households, and the current transfers to public corporations. Just refer the note, you will get the answer, right? Okay, moving on to this question 34. A regressive income tax is one where the poor, okay, is one where the poor කියලා කියනවටත් වඩා ඒක මෙහෙම කියවන තමයි ගති. If it's a regressive income tax, this is the quality of regressive income tax. So when the tax base, right, when the tax base decreases, what get increased? Tax rate is increased. When tax base decreases, tax rate increases. If not, simply there's a negative relationship between tax base and the tax rate. So that is a regressive tax. So that what happens? A regressive tax is one where the poor. So when they say poor, they are just referring to this lower tax base, right? Poor, if the tax base is lower, the tax rate, the percentage of tax that they pay has to be greater. So that's the nature of regressive income tax. Okay, so we will try to find the answer for this. First one says have a lower percentage of their income taxed than the rich. Not a lower percentage, but a higher percentage of their income is taxed compared to a higher tax base. Nothing compared to simply rich. Right. So this is not true, but the opposite is true. Where the poor pay a larger rupee amount in tax than the rich. I'm not referring to the rupee amount that the poor pays. I'm referring to the tax rate that they pay. It's about always the tax rate, not the rupee amount in tax. So this is not true then. Sorry, second one is not true then. Third one says regressive income tax is one where the poor pay a tax that varies proportionately with their income. If so, that has to be proportionate tax, right? Proportionate tax, not regressive tax. The fourth one, a regressive income tax is one where the poor have a higher percentage of their income taxed than the rich. 100% true. Percentage of tax means the tax rate. That's true then. Fifth one, where the poor are able to use tax revenue to purchase essential. And tax revenue is not collected by the poor people. Tax revenue is collected by the government. Right. Question 35 now. It says the prominent source of revenue of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka at present. See, I'm not going to discuss such questions because the answer may not be relevant for your A-level year. So we will skip this one. Right, look at this question 36 now. It says, according to the principle of comparative advantage, okay, if it's about the comparative advantage, it's always about the lowest opportunity cost. Simple as that, right? According to the principle of comparative advantage, worldwide output, simply the aggregate output, and the consumption levels will be highest when goods are produced in countries where which of the following is true? First one, where the opportunity costs are lowest, 100% true. And that's why I told you that if it's the comparative advantage, it's always about the lowest opportunity cost. Then the answer is the first one itself. Right. එතකොට අනිත් කිසිම දෙයක් ඇත්තනම් කියවලා කිසිම තේරුමක් නැහැ. මොකද හේතුව comparative නම් always lowest opportunity cost. It was absolute නම් it's about the highest productivity. Right. Now look at this question 37. It says in country A, it takes 5 labor hours to produce 1 unit of cloth and 10 labor hours to produce 1 unit of rice. Okay, the best thing is to tabulate this data. So let me take the two countries this way, country A, and also we have country B, and we get the two products. What are the two products? We have clothing and also we have rice. So we have clothes and then we get rice. Okay. Then be careful that here in this paragraph, you get the labor hours required to produce 1 unit of cloth and 1 unit of rice, which means the table that we are going to develop will present the required inputs. So that this is under input approach, right? This is under input approach. In country A, it needs 5 labor hours to produce 1 unit of cloth and then 10 labor hours to produce 1 unit of rice. Okay. The next part, in country B, it takes 7 labor hours to produce 1 unit of cloth. 7 labor hours to produce 1 unit of cloth and then 21 labor hours to produce 1 unit of rice. 21 labor hours to produce 1 unit of rice. And then if the two countries have decided to specialize according to each country's comparative advantage, at what exchange rate would the country A be willing to trade with country B? Okay, we need to recognize this trade ratio, right? But before we recognize this exchange rate or the ratio, we need to recognize which country has the comparative advantage for each product. But be careful. That's why I told you earlier that this entire table presents us the inputs required to produce 1 unit of output from the two goods given. Enisa, under input approach, when you recognize the opportunity cost, what's the equation that you should apply? Opportunity cost of, let's say, good X under input approach is delta X over delta Y, right? It's delta X over delta Y. Opportunity cost of X is equal to delta X equals delta Y. But if it's the output approach, we will use the reciprocal of this equation to find the opportunity cost, right? So let's consider this to be this good X and this to be this good Y. Assuming so, how do we find the opportunity cost of producing each good in country A, right? Think about this country A, only country A for the time being. So delta X 5 over delta Y, that's 10. So that you get the answer 0.5. And on the other side, it's again, if it's the opportunity cost of producing good Y, then delta Y over delta X, which is 5. So that the answer is 2. And in country B, now focus on this country B only, right? Only country B. Right, look at this now. If it's the opportunity cost of producing this good X in country B, it's delta X over delta Y, which is 1 over 3, which means 0.33. And if it's the opportunity cost of producing the good Y, it's 21 over 7, and the answer is 3. Right, clear. Now, we need to develop this exchange rate, right? So better if we can develop it based on this country A, because that's how we get the question. So let's first recognize that this country A specializes in which product. So if it is country A, wait, for clothes, the lowest opportunity cost is here, and for rice, the lowest opportunity cost is here. So country A should be specialized in producing rice, right? Producing rice. And then country B should be specialized in producing cloth. So that's the thing. And if country A specializes in producing rice, we can write 1 unit of rice should be exchanged in this ratio. What's the ratio? Produce කරන රටේ opportunity cost එක අපි හැමතිස්සෙම lowest value එක විතර ලියනවා. So 2 units of clothes, and on the other side, what do we write? If the other country buys this, their opportunity cost is 3. So we will write here 3 units of clothes. So that's how we develop this exchange rate. Right. So this is the exchange rate then. So if you can calculate this simple thing, you can find the answer easily. Right. Now look at this one. It says more than 2 units of cloth per unit of rice. See that now, more than 2 units, if that to be beneficial, right? The rate has to be more than 2 units of cloth, but less than 3 units of clothes. ඕක තමයි යන්නේ. හැබැයි මේක ඔයා ඕන ආන්සර් එක කියලා බලන්න ඒගොල්ලෝ එක පැත්තක් විතරයි කතා කරන්නේ. අර අනිත් පැත්ත කතා කරන්නේ නැහැ. කියන්නේ less than 3 කියන part එක කතා කරන්නේ. So this itself is the answer then, right? For this exchange rate to be beneficial for this country A, they should receive more than 2 units of cloth per 1 unit of rice. And this is the answer for question 37. Right. Now look at this question 38. Which two of the following arguments which two, right, of the following arguments are most likely to be to be used to justify protectionism? Justifying protectionism means somebody saying that protectionism is good for a country, right? So why do we think so? Why should we think so? We'll read the first point and see. First point says to protect high cost domestic industries. High cost domestic industries නම් protectionism කියලා එකක් ඇත්තටම වුමනාම නැහැ. ඒවා වැහිලා යන තරමටම තමයි හොඳ for the entire economy. ඒ නිසා මේ වගේ වට protectionism ඕනේ නැහැ කියලායි කියන්නේ. It's totally ignorable. Second one, to protect strategically important industries, maybe defense, military. So that's 100% true, right? We need protectionism to protect strategically important industries, 100% true. And we need protectionism even to protect infant industries. See, these are small scale businesses who are in their initial stage of the business. So it's a responsibility of the government to protect these industries from the international competition. So we need protectionism to protect these infant industries. And the third one, to protect environmental standards. So that is also true. We need the protectionism to protect our environment as well. And the last one says to maximize government tax revenue. Protectionism නිසා tax revenue එක වැඩි වෙන්නේ නැහැ. අතරම් protectionism නිසා අර duty tax එක එන්නේ නැහැ. කියන්නේ import duty එන්නේ නැති වෙනවා මිසක් tax revenue එක වැඩි වෙන්නේ නැහැ. So this is also ignorable. Then these three are the answers. But if you look at the given answers, so they haven't given all 3 points. So that's why they ask us to recognize most likely reasons to justify the protectionism. So most likely reasons, this is like 100% thing. එතකොට ඊළඟ එක කියලා ඒගොල්ලෝ අරගෙන තියෙන environment එක නෙමෙයි. ඒගොල්ලෝ environment එකට කලින් මෙන්න මේක බලලා තියෙනවා to protect infant industries. හැබැයි this is also, I mean, it must be also a consideration, but in the provided answer, this is what they have taken. Right. 39th. In which account of the balance of payments would an inflow of foreign direct investment be recorded? Okay. If it's a foreign direct investment, and let's assume that we receive that in the form of cash, so where do we record it? I mean, what's the double entry relevant to this direct investment? The double entry goes as this. We write currency and deposits. Currency and deposits account, that is debited, and then direct investment account. Direct investment account must be credited. So this is how the double entry goes. And if you look at this thing very carefully, you will be able to understand that both these accounts, I mean the currency and deposits account and the direct investment account, both these accounts we receive under financial account, right? We receive them under financial account. And that's why this becomes the answer for this question 39. Next one, floating exchange rate refers to, see that now, just look at the name, floating exchange rate. The exchange rate floats. Floats based on what? Simply, it floats based on the demand and supply for the available currencies. එහෙනම් ඕක තමයි කතන්දරේ. එහෙනම් first one says the exchange rates failing to adjust නම් ඒකට නම කියන්න ඕනද floating කියලා. Second one, exchange rates maintained by the government through the interventions in exchange market. So මේ වගේ එකකට අපි කියනවා this is where we say manage floating exchange rate system. It allows, I mean, the government allows the exchange rate to float to a certain level, but the government intervention is anyway there. But that's not just floating exchange rate. It's about the managed floating exchange rate, right? So this is not the answer then, because the one related to this is managed floating exchange rate. The third one says exchange rates determined by demand and supply of a country's currency. 100% true, right? So that is the meaning of free floating exchange rate, right? Then Fourth one, a situation where excess demand for a country's currency causes its devaluation. A situation where excess supply of a country's currency causes its appreciation. I actually don't know the meaning of these two, right? There's no meaning as I believe. So the answer for this question 40 is the third one. Right, now look at this question 41. The solution proposed by the International Monetary Fund, which was established to help countries that have balance of payment and foreign exchange reserve problems was. Okay, so the solution proposed by the IMF. What could be the solution proposed by IMF? We'll go through one by one. The first one says revaluation of country's currency. See that now, if revaluation happens, what will happen? Revaluation may worsen the balance of payment problem that the economy is facing now, because when revaluation happens, imports to the country will be increased, but exports from the country will be decreased. Then the balance of payment issue will be worsened. So this will never be the answer, right? And the third one says lending the country foreign exchange reserves, which means simply they lend us the required foreign currency, let's say dollars. They lend us dollars to repurchase and reverse repurchase agreements. See that now, what do we mean by this repurchase and reverse repurchase agreements? Repurchase agreements means, hope you remember what happens between central bank and commercial banks. එතර මොකද වෙන්නේ? Let's say if we have Central Bank of Sri Lanka on this side and then the commercial banks on this side, right? The central bank purchase treasury bills, right? Central bank purchase treasury bills and then provide necessary required amount of cash to the commercial banks, right, with an agreement that the commercial bank would repurchase these by paying the obtained cash back. So such agreements we recognize as repurchase agreements, and reverse repurchase agreements is where the opposite happens. And that's the exact same thing that happens when IMF provides loans to the countries in general, right? In general, but there are situations where this process is not applicable, but in general, that's what happens. So this is the true statement there. The third one says the solution proposed by IMF is this helping to re-establish countries' exchange rate at a higher level. එහෙම higher level නම් කරන්නේ නැහැ. ඒගොල්ලෝ කියයි මේක float වෙන්න දෙන්න හරි ඒ වගේ මොකක් හරි එකක් කියයි. නැතුව higher level එකකට ඒක set කරන්නේ නැහැ කිසිම වෙලාවක. Fourth one, then again this will happen, right? The fourth one, purchasing the country's assets abroad and converting them to foreign currencies. එහෙම ඒවා කරන්නේ නැහැ නේ. කියන්නේ රටේ assets ටික අරගෙන ඒක convert කරලා සල්ලි දෙනවා. එහෙම scene එකක් එතන කිසිම දෙයක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. අර treasury bills නැත් ඒ කියන්නේ bonds හරි bills හරි තමයි එතන transactions වෙන්නේ. Right. Fifth one, helping the country to find new markets for exports. See that now, this finding new markets, නැත්නම් helping to find new markets for exports is not something related to, this, I mean, it is related to the balance of payment issue, but it is not something related to IMF. This is more towards World Trade Organization. So this could be taken under World Trade Organization, but not under IMF. Right. Look at this question 42 now. Right now, this says the diagram below shows the value of Sri Lankan rupee in terms of US dollars. Okay, so we see the diagram, and then below the diagram it says what will be the effect of the shift in demand curve for Sri Lankan rupees from D1 to D2. Okay, so this is where the rupee supply curve is, and this is the initial rupee demand curve. And secondly, see what has happened to the rupee demand. Rupee demand has decreased so that the demand curve has been shifted to the left side. Okay, so as a result of this shift of the demand curve, what has happened? Previously, the price of 1 rupee in terms of dollars was 0.006, but now the price of 1 rupee in terms of dollars has decreased, and this we recognize as depreciation of rupees. So let me write rupee has depreciated, right? Rupee has depreciated. So normally, I mean, in general terms, when the rupee is depreciated, what happens? It will be beneficial for the exporters, right? So that they will be encouraged. But on the other side, importers will be discouraged. Exporters get encouraged and importers will be discouraged. Okay, tamai general kadande. And then it says, what will be the effect of this shift? Okay, the first one is Sri Lankan exports to the USA will be more expensive. No, just look at this thing. Just imagine that we send a product worth 1 rupees to the American market. Just assume so. We send 1 rupee worth product to the American market. And earlier they had to pay $0.006 for this product. But after this devaluation or depreciation of rupee happens, they just need to pay just $0.005 in the American market, which means after this depreciation happens, the Sri Lankan products, right, is very much affordable, right? It becomes much more cheaper to the American consumers. So that opposite of this is true. Second one says it will be cheaper for Sri Lankan tourists to visit USA. See, the rupee has depreciated. In a situation, if the when the rupee get depreciated, if you need to travel to USA, you will have to pay more and more amount of rupees to obtain that whatever the required dollar amount for your tour. Henisa, again, the opposite of this is true. And the third one says Sri Lankan treasury bonds will be cheaper for US investors. 100% true. See, imagine that they purchase 1 billion worth treasury bills or maybe treasury bonds, right? In the first situation, they will have to pay $0.006 for every rupee that they invest here in Sri Lanka. But after this depreciation happens, they just need to pay $0.005 for every rupee that they invest here. And so now they can make investments at a cheaper price. So this is true then. Fourth one is Sri Lankan treasury bonds will be more expensive for the US investors, which is simply the opposite of the previous one. So which is wrong, because if the first one is true and if this is the opposite of that, that has to be false then. The fifth one says the cost of imports from USA will decrease. Right? The cost, right? Cost will decrease. That's why I earlier told you that even if you travel to USA, let's say that for your entire tour, it cost $1,000, right? It cost $1,000 for the entire tour. So if you travel before this rupee depreciation happens, you would have obtained these $1,000 by paying a lower rupee amount. But after depreciation happens, right, you will have to pay a higher rupee amount to purchase this $1,000. And the same thing is applicable even if you import goods from USA. Now you will have to pay, if you are importing $1,000 worth product from USA market, now you will have to pay a higher rupee amount to purchase this thing, so that the cost will not decrease, it will instead increase. Right, so that's the correct. The opposite of this is the correct answer. Right. So for this question 42, what's the correct answer from the 5 provided options? It's the third one. Right. Now look at this question 43. It says economic development means. Okay, what is economic development? It's not growth. We have discussed this many times in our previous discussions of these past papers. So development is something which includes both quantitative and qualitative improvements. If you look at the first one, it says economic growth with balance of payment surplus, which is totally quantitative, which is not development. Second one, economic growth plus structural and qualitative changes. See the now, economic growth plus structural and qualitative. So this part is related to the quantitative changes, and this part is with regard to qualitative changes. And if both happens, yes, we say that the economy gets developed. So that's the answer for this question 43 now. Third one says improvement in the living standards of the urban population. We had the same sentence in 2019 paper as well, which is not true. Or a common sense, urban population එක විතරක් ගැන මෙතන කතා වෙන්නේ. So it will never be the answer. Fourth one, sustainable increase in gross national income. Now you see the word sustainable, but just because you see sustainable, it's not something related to economic development, because here they just talk about the sustainable increase in GNI, which is quantitative, right? Only quantitative, not qualitative factors are included. Fifth one, equitable income distribution along with a reduction in poverty level. So this is more towards the income distribution, right? Not the economic development. So this is not the answer there. All right, 44 now. Sustainable development implies, okay, now we know the previous question was from just economic development, and this is from sustainable development. So when it comes to this sustainable development, it's more towards preserving resources for future generations, right? And protecting environment. So those are the main focus areas of sustainable development. Okay, now look at the first one. Development that provides for economic and social viability for the present, even if the results in environmental degradation for future. See, which is not totally, simply ignorable, totally false, common sense. This will never be the answer. Second one, development that provides environmental sustainability, good, for the present, even if the results in economic and social degradation for the future generations, which is not again true. Because I told you, sustainable development more focuses on the resource availability for future generations. Third one says development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the availability of future generations to meet their own needs. 100% true. That is where we focus in sustainable development. The fourth option says full exploitation. See that full exploitation is never be the will never be the answer, right? The fifth one, development that meets the needs of future generations, even if the present society's needs go unmet, which is again not relevant for this thing, right? Totally ignorable. 45. Absolute poverty line is drawn to show. See that now. The absolute poverty line is drawn. Why it is drawn? It is drawn just to show that we need this much of income just to survive in the society as a human, and that's the purpose of drawing this thing. So what's the answer then? The most extreme level of poverty that is found in the society. No, it just say that we need at least, minimum this much to survive in the society. So this is not true then. Second one, the estimated minimum level of income needed for subsistence. 100% true, right? Just to exist, just to survive here, this is the level of income that is needed, and that's the absolute poverty line. Third one says the number of households that are poor relative to the norms and values of their culture. Not true. The areas of a city in which poor is, see that now, will never be the answer, because we haven't discussed anything similar to this in our syllabus. Fifth one, the average monthly income of the lowest 10% of the, no, what is that? Okay, 46. Lorentz curve is used to measure which of the following. So why do we use this Lorentz curve? So I think this is not the first time we had several similar questions before this. We have discussed all. So I'm just telling you that this Lorentz curve is used to evaluate the relative income distribution, right? So what's the answer then? The ratio of income to wealth in different countries, not the ratio to income to wealth, but it compares. See that now when you draw the Lorentz curve, right? This 45-degree line we recognize as equidistributed. This is equidistributed line. And what does this equidistributed line represent? It represents that 50% of the population should receive 50% of the total wealth. And then 75% of the population should receive 75% of the total wealth, which means this equidistributed line represents the equality in income distribution. And on this diagram, you just draw this. And what is this? That's the real Lorentz curve, right? That's a real Lorentz curve. And the Lorentz curve represents, even if this is the equality in income distribution, in real, 50% of the population earns only, let's say, this much. So that is presented by the Lorentz curve. So when you take this whole diagram, what does it present you? This has to be the equality level, but this is the real income distribution. So the gap between these two shows you the inequality in income distribution. That's it. එතන තියෙන්නේ මේ ratio to income, ratio of income to wealth එහෙම කතන්දරයක් නෙමෙයි. Second one, the ratio of public goods to private, see, ignorable, right? Ignorable, no meaning. Third one, the ratio of income inequality to income equality in different countries. See the ratio of income inequality to income equality. අර මම කිව්වේ 50% of the population should own 50% of the wealth. That's the ratio of income equality, right? That's income equality. And then the Lorentz curve represents you, though the equality is there, in real, 50% of the population in the country earns only 20%. That is the inequality of the income, right? So that is presented to you from the Lorentz curve. So answer is the third one. The ratio of highest to lowest percentage of income receivers of a country, no? The ratio of non-working age, hope you understand, right? So the answer is the third one. 47. Under which type of unemployment does the marginal productivity of worker is zero or closer to zero? It's not that we have unemployed people, right? We have more than enough employed people, but the problem, their marginal productivity, if not the productivity we receive from each additional worker is almost zero, which means there's no productivity at all, right? There's no productivity at all from each additional worker. ඒකෙන් අදහස් වෙන්නේ මොකද්ද? උවමනාවටත් වඩා මිනිස්සු ඉන්නවා. ඒ වැඩි වෙන මිනිසුන්ගෙන් productivity එකට කිසිම addition එකක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. And that situation we recognize as hidden unemployment, right? But in this provided paper, they haven't used the word hidden unemployment, so that we will have to choose this disguised unemployment. So that's the answer. Just refer the note, you will find this, right? They are the in notes, in any note, right? And 48 one says, World Bank's ease of doing business indicators. See that now, ease of doing business, the convenience of starting the business and the convenience of maintaining the business, conducting the business. So that is what evaluated from this ease of doing business indicator. Right. So what's the answer then? Rank countries by the size of their foreign direct investments? No. Rank countries by the size of their foreign direct investment as? No. Rank the industries in which countries have comparative, ignorable, right? Measure the ease of starting and running a business. in many countries, not in all countries. Yeah, they have selected set of countries and it changes year to year, it changes. So yes, that's what they do. The ease of starting means the convenience of starting the business and the convenience of maintaining the running, operating the business. That is the answer there. So no point of going through other things because these are facts and you just need to get them from the notes, right? 49. Which group correctly indicates the sectoral composition of Sri Lanka's GDP? Okay, this is not going to be relevant to your A-level year, so we'll skip this one. 50th, the top 4 countries contributed to FDI inflows in Sri Lanka again in year 2018, which is not relevant to your A-level year. Okay, so that's the end of this discussion of this 2020 MCQ Economics paper.